Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the NHM Lates and to our Nature Live. Wait till you've heard the talk. Now, my name's Alison. I'm your host for this evening. And as you already know, our Late tonight, we are celebrating exploration and discovery. From historic voyages like the Beagle to more modern, but no less intrepid explorations. And I am delighted tonight to be joined by Martin Robson. He is going to take us through his passion for cave diving. What we want to do with our talk today is take you to some of the places that very few people have ever been to on Earth. It's a fascinating talk we've got for you tonight. And if any of you have been to our Life in the Dark exhibition, hopefully you have. If you haven't, you really should. There is a fantastic display about caves and cave diving in that exhibition, and Martin was our consultant on that. So we're very, very grateful to him. Now, I have lots and lots of questions for Martin, but as with all of our Nature Lives, this is very, very informal. We would really love to hear from you, our audience, so please don't be shy. If you have a question at any point, raise your hand or call out if we don't spot you. We have a microphone that we'll bring over to you so that everyone can hear, and we'll try to get through as many of those questions as we can. But let's meet our speaker. Martin, thank you so much for coming down today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I started my diving career in the military as a military diver. And then when I left the military, I continued diving, and I went one day on a scuba diving holiday, out of season, so I was pretty much the only one there. And I went to Malta. And in those days, we didn't really have necessarily sort of certificates to say that we're a qualified diver. So all I had was a military logbook saying that I had been underwater. And the dive centre said, well, OK, we'll take you underwater for a checkout dive. We'll see if you can actually do what you say you can do. So we went and did this checkout dive, and we came back, and the guy said to me, well, it's obviously you can dive. You did OK. We want to make it exciting for you, so we'll take you cave diving. Well, that sounds pretty cool. Now, with hindsight, it wasn't cave diving. What we were doing is we were just swimming underneath some rocks, under boulders, and doing what we call swim-throughs. So short little swims underneath something, but I can see from where I go in where I'm going to come out. So they weren't really cave dives, but it ignited a passion for me. So when I got back to the UK, I armed myself with some geological survey maps of Europe and headed off primarily to France and looked around for any hole in the ground that was full of water and put my scuba kit on and jumped in to see if it would go anywhere. Most of the time failing miserably, just ending up in a muddy puddle, getting tangled up in fallen trees that have fallen into rivers and all sorts of things. But eventually we did find a few caves, and I started to go cave diving.
Now, I don't know about our audience, but for me personally, the thought of a cramped, dark space full of water is the stuff of nightmares. But you have the complete opposite reaction, don't you? So what is it about these environments that attracts you? Well,
if we dispel a few myths, most people think that cave diving would be the equivalent of putting your head into a bucket of mud. It's about all you're going to see. You're going to get trapped, you're going to get squashed, you're going to get lost, you'll never find your way out, and it's horrible. There are places like that, and some of us do enjoy that kind of activity from time to time, but most of the places we go to are unbelievably beautiful, mind-numbingly clear water, beautiful cave passages, some of them enormous cave passages, as big as the inside of St. Paul's Cathedral in some cases. And it allows us to do things that very few people get the opportunity to do. There are places on this planet that I've been to where more people have walked on the moon. There are a few places on this planet where I'm the only human being ever to have gone there, which is remarkable, and I feel very privileged. But it allows us to do something else. We time travel. So if we look at this picture, just to give you an idea of where we are, we're in the middle of France in a cave. Now, has anyone here a scuba diver? Anyone done it? Fantastic. So if I remember rightly, I could get this wrong, when you learn to dive, your general sort of limited in how deep you can go so that you stay safe. When you first start, it's about 18 meters. If you do a little bit more training, it's 30 meters. And then if you do a little bit more training still, it could be 40. And then you start to get into the realms of what we call technical diving. So a little bit more equipment and a requirement to do what we call decompression stops. We'll talk more about those later. But 30, 40 meters is quite a deep recreational dive. This cave, this photograph is at 147 meters deep. A long way down, an even longer way back up. But what we can't see in the picture is the floor of the cave is covered in fossilized fish from millions and millions of years ago. So at some point on this planet's history, that was the bottom of the ocean. So I am now looking at something 4, 5, 6 million years old. And it's remarkable to be able to do that and to see these places. It really is quite a privilege.
So when you put it like that, it does start to look a little bit more attractive, I will confess. And I'm guessing many places that you visit, no one else has been before, so you're the first person.
There are a few of us who sort of are pushing caves and exploring caves, but most of it is so remote, so deep, so far back in the cave system that very, very few people go, and very, very few people get to see these places.
It's remarkable. We wanted to give you a bit of a feel of what these environments are like. So we do have some fantastic film footage we can play now. Martin, perhaps you can talk us through where we are.
So this is in France. This is not one of the bigger caves. Which is why we've got our equipment on our side. Traditionally, most people associate sort of scuba diving with having cylinders. Those are the white things I'm carrying on your back. But obviously, we're not going to fit in if they're on our back, so we carry them in side mount equipment. If you look very carefully at the video, particularly the next section, if you look at the floor now and the walls, what you can see there is Mother Nature at her most powerful. So all of you now think of Lawrence of Arabia and a sand dune. And I know what you're thinking of. It's the same kind of typical Hollywood-esque picture of a sand dune. Well, that sand dune has been made by the wind blowing the sand. The rocks you can see now, the shape of the rocks and what we call the scalloping on the floor and the walls, the sand has been replaced by the cave rock, and the wind has been replaced by the water. So that scalloping is formed just by the force and the power of the water moving through the cave system, which is truly remarkable and very beautiful.
It is. It's incredibly beautiful. Now, you're swimming quite slowly and deliberately there. Is there a particular way that you have to swim?
If you imagine most scuba divers, or even if you're not a diver, you'd have big fins on and you'd be kicking your legs like this to move through the water. Even though the water is gin clear in this cave system, there's a lot of sediment, a lot of silt, and very fine dust covering the wall, and sometimes even stuck to the ceiling and all along the floor. So if we kicked like this, the wash from our fins would just disturb all of that. And if we're going in, the person behind us wouldn't be able to see where they're going. And if we're coming out, probably no one would be able to see where they're going, which is not always a good thing. So we try to swim very, very slowly and very, very deliberately. And the kick we use, the fin technique we use, is having your fins nice and high off the floor and moving them backwards. It's actually called frog kick. We're trying to move our legs like we're a frog. And what that does is it means that all the wash from your fins just goes straight back down the cave into the water and minimizes the amount of disturbance that we cause to the environment, so that not only can we see what we're doing, but we're not going to damage the cave.
How physically fit do you have to be to cave dive?
You don't have to be as fit as a triathlete, but some of the equipment can be very heavy. So fully loaded, the device I've got on my back there, which is called a rebreather, could weigh up to 50 kilos. And once you're in the water, you don't necessarily feel that weight, but in order to swim with it, if that's what you were doing, you'd have to have enough leg strength and enough power to push that momentum through the water, even though it's technically weightless. So you do have to be reasonably fit and happy to be under the water for a reasonable amount of time and moving that heavy equipment.
And I noted in some of the images in the film, we see a rope. Is that like a guide rope? Does that help you find your way around?
It's not a rope you can pull on, but basically it's the same as a trail of breadcrumbs. If that wasn't there, we would have no real way of navigating around this cave system. It's like diving inside a Swiss cheese. It's very, very difficult to know where you're going. It's almost impossible with the constant changes of depth and direction to use a compass to navigate. And so we lay bits of string to help us find our way back out. Otherwise, we'd never make it. And
what sorts of equipment do you use? Is it very different from if you were deep sea diving, for example?
The device I had on my back in one of the previous photographs with the yellow box on it is called a rebreather. And it's equally suitable for diving in the open ocean or in cave diving. Right now, the atmosphere in this room is air. It's about 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen. When we breathe that in, we do nothing with the nitrogen, that just goes in and out. But we metabolize about 4% oxygen, and we exhale carbon dioxide. But we also exhale 16% oxygen, which is a waste. And if we're using traditional open circuit diving equipment, that would be the bubbles you see coming out of the regulators in our mouth, and that would be a waste of gas. So the devices we use, and the device I'm wearing basically, is a closed loop, and it traps my exhaled breath. That exhaled breath then goes through a chemical scrubber which scrubs out the carbon dioxide. The gas that is left is then seen by a number of oxygen or gas sensors that actually analyze whatever it is that's left. That's communicated to a couple of computers, and then also talks to a computer that's on our wrist that's all hardwired together. And using that, the diver can control exactly what it is he's breathing, and the computers will then inject just the right amount of whatever gas it is you need to make it the perfect breathing mix. And these things last hours and hours. So to give you an example, if you look at that picture, those sort of silver-coloured cylinders have a capacity of 11 litres of water. Obviously, they don't contain water. They contain air or another gas that's compressed. So at 200 bar, there would be 2,200 litres of gas in that cylinder. Inside my rebreather, there's a 3-litre cylinder, tiny little thing. And a 3-litre cylinder of oxygen will last me 10 hours. So you can now see these devices allow us not just to dive very, very deep, but to stay underwater for a very, very long time if we want to.
What are the biggest potential hazards in this environment? Is it the temperature, the pressure?
We don't feel the pressure really, no matter how deep we go, because as water is virtually incompressible. You can't squeeze water, and we are actually predominantly water, and so we don't feel the pressure. The only place we really feel the pressure is in any air spaces we've got, because air can be compressed. So the air spaces for most of us, and we've probably all experienced this on a aircraft, is around your sinuses. So when the aircraft comes in, we all have to pop our nose or pop our ears. We have to do the same when we're diving to equalize our air spaces with the outside pressure. But apart from that, our bodies don't feel it. We can sometimes, or we do, feel the cold. Water extracts heat from our body a lot quicker than being in an air environment, and so we try and insulate ourselves as much as we can, not to stop ourselves getting cold, because that's impossible, but to slow the cooling process. So I'm wearing a thing called a dry suit there, so not a normal sort of scuba diving wetsuit, and underneath that I've got a nice thick layer of sort of merino wool thermal underwear, long legs, long arms. On top of that, I'm wearing a kind of Gillette, like a little vest thing, little padded sort of winter sort of outdoor vest. But it's electrically heated by a big battery pack that I'm carrying. On top of that, I'm wearing what can only be described as a really, really giant, extra thick, adult-sized baby grow. It's exactly what it and that's electrically heated from the ankles to my wrists as well. I'm wearing dry gloves, and those dry gloves have got undergloves to keep my hands warm, and my undergloves are electrically heated, powered by another battery pack. So we try and stay as warm as we can. But to give you an idea, that photograph is taken in a diving site that's the water's 7 degrees, and that was on a dive that's probably about 16 hours long. So you're going to get cold.
Wow. And there was one slightly unusual looking piece of kit that caught my eye. What's this contraption?
That is the Habitat, Home from Home. If you take a glass, just an empty glass, and a bucket of water, turn the glass upside down and push it into the bucket, then that glass, as long as it doesn't go too deep, won't fill up with water. There will be an airspace trapped in it, and that airspace will be at the same pressure as the depth of water the glass is at. So if we build this contraption underwater and then fill it with air, at whatever depth that contraption is, we can get into it and we will still be at the same pressure as the outside water pressure, which means that we can get out of it, we're dry because we're in air, we're still under pressure, so we haven't come up to the surface, and we can get warm. In 10-degree water, one diver in something about that size will raise the temperature of the inside of the Habitat by about 4 degrees. And that makes a huge difference when you're in there for a very, very, very long time. And the other thing is that because we're dry, we can eat and we can drink. Normally, it's tea or coffee or hot chocolate, some sandwiches. We have these toothpaste tubes with something in that tastes like extra sweet condensed milk. It's disgusting. It's a high protein, low residue diet. We could be in there for 12 hours. You can figure out why it's low residue for yourself. And that's the sort of thing we do. Some people like chocolate or whatever. So this photograph is taken inside the Habitat on a cave dive in France. So my support team have thought, well, we're in France. No one wants tea and sandwiches. We'll take him some nice cheeses and a bottle of wine. Now, when you go underwater, the gases that we don't metabolize get dissolved into our system. We can't feel it, but what it means is if we dive very deep or we stay very long, we can't just come straight to the surface. We have to stop at different depths all the way up to allow this gas to come out of solution, get circulated around our body safely, and then we can exhale it as evaporated gas. So I've been on a very long dive. It's been quite deep. I think this one was about 174 meters. And so I'm still full of bubbles. And I'm in the Habitat, so I'm under pressure. I'm at slightly more than 1.5 times the pressure in this room. And now I'm drinking red wine. It's a really cheap, quick way to get absolutely hammered. It really is.
I don't know how drunk I'd want to be on a cave dive, if I'm honest. Now, Martin, what's your main motivation for a dive usually? Is it simply just for exploration, or are there other reasons?
Most of it's just for exploration. It's the opportunity to go and look at places that so few people have been to, but also it's the opportunity to do, for me, there's also a secondary exploration, and it's an exploration of me as a human being, is just how much can we do? I know that sort of when you're a little child, you want to be an astronaut, you want to walk on the moon. I don't. I would love to walk or swim in the deepest trench of the deepest ocean. It's not possible. It just physically it can't be done. But where is the limit? Where is the line? Not in the sand, but where's the line through the water that says we can't go any deeper? Or it might not just be depth, it could be simply the logistics of a particular dive. There's a cave in France where it takes quite a long time to get very, very deep, down to about 90 meters. And then, because of the nature of the rock, the cave then just turns and goes uphill to about 30 meters. And when you get, and you're still underwater, and then the next big dip goes down to again to about 90 meters. And then the next one goes up to about 4 meters. So every time you go down and come back up, you've got to decompress, and you've got to decompress for longer and longer and longer. But of course, at some point you want to turn around and come home, and you have to reverse all of that. And it gets longer and longer and longer. So it's the challenge of how do we do that safely, and what as human beings can we possibly do to make this achievable? And so far it's not. It's just right on the limit of what we can cope with.
Do we have any questions from our audience for Martin so far? I'm sure we do. Yep, question here. Oh, if you don't mind waiting for the mic so we can all hear. Thank you.
Hello. Oh,
Hello.
Hello, my name's Adam. I did advanced PADI, but I'm nowhere near you, don't worry. How do you calculate what the limit is?
Knowing when sometimes things don't go quite so well, which we'll talk about later. And just pushing the envelope a little bit each time. There's no, if you do decompression diving, as in you go a little bit deeper, you stay too long, there are software packages that we can use to help calculate how long we have to take to get out the water. As we come up, what depths we have to stop at, and for how long. And a lot of them have been tested by people doing it, but there is a limit to how much you can sort of do human experimentation. So when you start getting into super deep water, and the pressures are getting very, very great, and the decompression obligation, how long we've got to stay, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. These mathematical algorithms, and they're just maths based on modeling human tissues, nothing more than that. But these algorithms get more and more unreliable. And so you look at the maths, you use your experience, you think, I think that's too long, or I don't think I need to do this, or there's too much pressure here, we need to be much, much shallower, we need to do this quicker. And you use a combination of the mathematics and your experience.
So we're doing a lot of experimenting on yourself, really.
Yes.
Any more questions before we move on? Yeah, one right at the back there.
How do you find these places?
We don't always find them. Oftentimes it'll be somebody else telling us that something is there. So for example, there's a place I'm going to talk about in Russia a little bit later, and some friends of mine have dived another cave that nobody knew of, and the reason we know about it now is, and it's in the middle of the woods. All the four-wheel drive trucks got stuck. They needed military assistance to get them out the mud and out of the woods. But basically, somebody, a local sort of like woodsman hill person, just came out of his little sort of nomadic existence and spoke to all these people diving in this massive great hole in the ground, saying, did you know there's another tiny little hole with water gushing out of it up in the mountains on my land? Of course we didn't. So it's information like that very often that gets us to go looking at places.
And did we have a question right at the back there?